Souls-likes have a stellar reputation for difficulty and opaque systems, which turn many people away from the genre before fully understanding how the game wants to be played. The first Berserker Khazan dials that up further by drawing from another Tough as Nails series, Koei Tecmo's Neo, so let's break things down for people who are starting from scratch. If you're new to the channel, hi, I'm Squid. My new player guides focus on giving you a functional understanding of the game without hand-holding you the entire way, so you still have the joy of discovery and experiencing the game for yourself, just without the frustration of needing to start from square one. I've spent enough time on this intro, let's get into it. So let's start off with the basics. Character stats. When you interact with these creepy eyeball crystal sword things that serve as this game's checkpoints or bonfires, you can upgrade your stats. So looking at the collection here, we have Vitality, Endurance, Strength, Willpower, and Proficiency. So if you select each one, look at the stats on the middle of the screen here, you can see what each one affects. Vitality, if we were to level it up, gives us additional health, additional damage, additional carrying capacity, as well as resistances all around. Endurance will give us slightly less health, more stamina, similar attack damage, extra stamina recovery. Strength, again, health, damage, weight, received stamina damage decrease. Willpower, the same basic stats, slightly less stamina recovery, but also some guard stamina damage decrease. So if you take a hit while guarding without doing a Brink guard, you'll take slightly less damage to your stamina bar. Finally, we have Proficiency, which again gives you some health and attack damage, depending upon the weapon, of course. And then also some stamina damage increase, so when you hit something else, you're going to do more damage to its stamina bar. And this will be important later, and decrease the stamina cost of your own dodges. An important thing to consider in Souls-likes is the idea of stat Softcaps. These are breakpoints at which you will get less incremental benefit for each point that you put into them. In Khazan, the breakpoints here are 30 and 60. So points that you put into a stat higher than 30 will give you less net benefit than you did before it was level 30, and subsequently, points after level 60 will give you less than you were getting before getting to level 60. Generally, you want to focus on baseline survivability, that'll be your vitality and endurance, and then your weapon's primary stat, which leads us into weapon scaling. If we look at our level 44 greatsword here, you can see the total attack damage, the attack damage that's baseline to the weapon, and then you'll see strength scaling B and proficiency scaling C. Scaling works like academic letter grades or tier list makers. The higher the grade, the more that stat improves the weapon. You'll eventually want to focus on gathering some of the secondary stat for your weapon, in this case proficiency, but early on, really focus the primary just to get the best bang for your buck. Now, allocation of stats is semi-permanent, meaning you can't change them around whenever you like. However, there are items in the game called the Primeval Regression Orb. This will reset a single stat and refund you all of the points that you've spent on that stat so that you can spend them somewhere else. You will get some of these during your playthrough naturally, and you can also purchase them from vendors. So in terms of early recommendations here, the game really won't tell you this, but bringing both vitality and endurance to 20-ish first off will make your early game experience much, much comfier. It'll afford you more HP and stamina, and more of each means you can make more mistakes per life, which, let's be honest, you're going to be making a lot of early on. More opportunity to learn means you get better faster. And vitality will also increase your equipment load, this stat right here. Equipment load follows a similar grading scale as weapons, A, B, C, D. And this directly impacts your dodge roll timing, distance, speed, and cost, as well as your stamina regen rate. Breakpoints to watch out for here are 60%, 75%, and 100%. Below 60 is A, below 75 is B, below 100 is C, and above 100 is D. Generally try to stay under 75 to keep B grade at worst. Okay, so moving on to combat. Yes, this first thing is a potentially obvious one, but I've seen so many new Souls-like players suffer far more than necessary. Lock-on is a thing. Use it. Enemies are mobile enough in this game that playing without it really only makes your life harder and you more frustrated, okay? As for healing, if you look on the bottom left here, see the red swirly ball. That's your healing item. Uses of this are limited, but it does refill when you interact with those creepy crystal eyeball sword checkpoints we talked about before. That said, when you interact with those checkpoints, you will also respawn all of the non-elite enemies in the zone. So be purposeful in your use of healing as well as those checkpoints. You'll get items to increase your netherworld energy amount as you play. So at the bottom middle of the screen here, underneath your red HP bar, you have the gray stamina bar. Stamina often goes overlooked by players new to Souls-likes. Don't do that. Everything you do and have done to you costs stamina. And running out will leave Khazan exhausted, which is a state where you'll be vulnerable and unable to act until he catches his breath. Usually you're going to eat a hit to the face, and well, nobody likes that. So, for attacks, each weapon has a quick, a strong, and a charge strong, which are honestly pretty self-explanatory. What's less well explained is how each have their own interactions with movement, like sprinting, dodging, or backsteps, which is what happens if you press the dodge button without holding a direction. Experiment and see how you can keep the pressure up, because the game also doesn't tell you how you can combo into and between the different attacks. Play around with your weapon type, see what you can make work. Next up, we got brutal attacks. If you deplete an enemy's stamina bar, so let's beat on this training dummy for a second, we get a rapidly diminishing red circle. If you hit B, you will do that brutal attack that does a grip of damage, and depending upon the armor and perk setup you have, a little bit of healing for you, which is nice. If you do a brutal attack from the front, it'll refill your stamina bar. If you do a brutal attack from behind, it'll do more damage. Now, if you're quick about it, you can also get in a little bit of extra damage window while that circle is deteriorating. So get in a few extra hits, and then hit the B button, or your platform equivalent, just before it expires. So for this next bit, our friendly neighborhood rage monster is going to help us demonstrate a thing. Dodges and guarding. Dodges and guards come in two basic flavors in the first Berserker, normal and Brink. Brink dodges and guards are what other games describe as perfect dodges and perfect parries. Think of this as hitting the dodge or guard button just before the hitbox of the enemy weapon would interact with your character. If you do this correctly, these consume far, far less stamina, and refill it in some cases, than the regular versions. And depending upon your setup, your Brink guards will also do pretty significant stamina and regular damage to the thing that you're doing a Brink guard against. So let me see if I can illustrate the differences here real quick. So we're going to do a regular guard, which, if you look at the stamina, is going to take some chunks away, right? That zeroes out, you're going to get exhausted, like we were talking about, and then take some hits to the face. So let's see if we can do a Brink guard here. Come on. So that red flashy one is the Brink guard. Time it right, and you see he kind of just wound up killing himself on us. Dodges are the same thing. You can dodge normally, and it's going to serve you just fine. But if you time it, just at that last second, you see how we leave that shadow of ourselves? That's what you're after. The last important defensive ability to consider, outside of individual weapons, is the Brutal Guard. As for these, the game explains them precisely once, very early on, so it's easy to miss. When an enemy initiates a brutal attack on you, a rune will pop up over Khazan. This is not your cue to hit the button combination. You want to time the button press for when the enemy hitbox is just about to hit you. So that when that white flash that you can see me doing right now, that flash you want to time for right when you get hit. This can be difficult to wrap your head around once you're lost to the black rage of combat, but think of this as a Brink guard or death kind of situation. All right, moving on to equipment. Now, as I mentioned at the top, the first Berserker draws heavily from the Neo series, which is kind of what happens when Dark Souls and Diablo get a little too friendly after the show. Loot comes in tiers from white, which is common, to orange, which is epic. Each item has a number of randomly generated attributes, depending on its tier, with higher tiers having more. Set items also have a collection of static stats that they grant based on the total number of the set pieces worn. Sets generally have a weapon type they favor, so pay attention to the bonuses and stack some silly OPness. Meh. OPness. Later on, you'll be able to both craft gear and re-roll the random affixes, but don't stress too much about min-maxing right now, because early on you're going to be cycling through gear silly fast. Now, up at the top of each of these pieces of equipment, you'll see a defense value. Yes, defense matters, and it also experiences rapidly diminishing returns as the game progresses. You'll take less damage, sure, as well as take less stamina damage with higher defense when you do get hit, but this goes hand in hand with heavier armor, which nerfs both your stamina regen and mobility. Find a balance you like, but I'd really encourage you to stay at a weight class of B or higher. Now, in addition to your standard weapon, armor, and jewelry slots, First Berserker uses a floating tool belt style slot. You can equip items from your inventory into these slots. And we're just going to use the training room items for sake of illustration here. And you'll be able to access them from your D-pad in the middle of combat without needing to open your inventory and fish around for the thing you want. Because realistically, that ain't going to happen before you're tanking the ground. Okay, moving on to the skill tree. So if we look at the weapons here, along the top portion of the weapon tree, you have the basic functionality of each weapon. Those will generally be followed by things like spirit spenders, which are then followed by points which add additional functionality or significant buffs to those skills. Generally, it's safe to consider the build and spend economy in regard to spirit first, then address any holes that exist, and then comfort. Skills for your weapons, as well as the common ones, which we'll talk about in a second, can be respecced at any point in time in the game for free. So, experiment, see what works, likely find some things that don't, and find a combination of points that work for you. Coming back to the common tree, these apply no matter what weapon you're using. Now, depending on which weapon you're using, it will inform which are of the most interest to you. On my greatsword run here, I'm really not seeing a whole lot of use for things like reflection, since I have other defensive options that serve the way I'm playing it much more effectively. Later on, I plan on picking up a little bit of these quality of life things that increase spirit gain when you're taking damage and brink dodges and attacking, etc. But these are generally best done after you've fleshed out your main weapon tree. Now, regardless of the weapon type you're using, I would recommend picking up this point, the Brutal Attack Reap skill, which really does help tip the battle of attrition both in longer levels and boss fights, far enough in your favor to make a loss and narrow win. Now, if we look at it, you recover health from using a brutal attack from head on. So, anytime you do a brutal from the front, you'll get a little bit of health and you'll refill your stamina. It's nice. Okay, so moving on to a lightning round of miscellaneous tips that I didn't really think fit well in any of the other categories. First, resistances matter. You're fighting in a zone with lots of fire damage or a particularly pesky elemental enemy, swap your jewelry around for some easy resists to get some extra breathing room to avoid being set on fire, or getting tased, or slowly dying to poison while you contemplate the folly of life, or you get the idea. 2. Talk to all of the NPCs in the crevice after every mission. Yes, this is a bit of a chore, but sometimes they'll have bonus missions for you, which unlock important mechanics and or loot. You don't want to miss out on these. 3. Soul dust and stones from interacting with the glowy corpses also heal you for a bit in addition to granting XP. If you're out of energy and you feel like a boss attempt is close to a kill, pop a few of these and get past the line. If you die on a boss, the lacrima drops outside of the fog gate, and you get a bit more in the attempt, so banging your head against the boss actually rewards you in this game instead of punishing you. As a rule, Souls-likes reward thoroughness and exploration. So here's the last tip without spoiling it. Shortly after you unlock the mortal version of the crevice, you'll gain access to an expanded area. Things which outwardly seem like solid foundations sometimes aren't. Figure that out, and you'll have a pretty nice early game armor set for free. See what else you can find in the game in that way. So there we go. That's as concise of a guide as I can make for players who've never touched a Souls-like. To get started with First Berserker Khazan, you should be well equipped enough at this point to start spreading some cel-shaded carnage, and we've left you enough to discover on your own, so you actually get to play the game instead of just following a checklist guide. Have fun. I'm usually streaming on both Twitch and YouTube a few times each week, and there's a Discord link in the channel bio where you can come chat with folks, ask some questions, and find teammates for any of the multiplayer games we've covered on the channel. I've been Bald Squid. I'll see you next time.